And just a few details here, folks, on the end of this chapter. A few things to keep in mind, some things that are going to be coming up along the way. And I know sometimes there's points of confusion on things. I want to just talk about a few things. We'll talk about some of the mathematical justification for this a little later on in the course, but some broad things that come up a few times that I want you to know now. So the overall notion, if we have a good sampling or experimental design, we like large sample sizes. So we really like large sample sizes. We're going to be better off in our estimation of population parameters when we have larger sample sizes. Those larger sample sizes result in estimators that have lower variability, and then we're going to be able to pinpoint the values of parameters a little bit better. So we do like large sample sizes. But that's pretty much when we have a good sampling design or an experimental design. The design is good, because if we have large sample sizes and bad stuff or terrible sampling design, say, that's not going to do us much, right? We're still going to have the estimators that have a lower variability, let's say, but we're going to be off. We're going to biased estimators, biased sampling designs, lazy biased estimators, and so we could be in trouble there. So large sample sizes don't save us from major problems in the sampling design or the experimental design. We might just be confident in our sample size of 50,000, but everything's completely wrong, and we just have greater confidence in something that's just wrong. That's no good. Okay. Sampling, we like large sample sizes, why not always do it? Of course, we can't always do it. It can be difficult, it can be expensive, it can be destructive, we have to kill things, we don't like to do that, right? That sort of idea, so it may cost us a lot of money, cost us a lot of time, that sort of thing. So there's lots of times when we simply have to live with small sample sizes. That's all we've got. We've got to just use this information as best we can, and then there's nothing wrong with small sample sizes. If that's how it goes, that's how it goes. If we have 3 observations, we have 3 observations. We're just going to deal with that as best we can, and the math will take care of it. The math will tell us what we can say. If we have a good sampling design and 3 observations, that's okay. We can deal with that. We're just, our estimators going to have a lot of variability and maybe not pin down the values of parameters so precisely. But we do like large sample sizes. They're very helpful. That's really only true if we have a good sampling design, a good experimental design, that sort of thing. And sometimes we simply have to live with small sample sizes. So overall, this might be not super intuitive. The sample size is the thing that matters. The sample size matters, and not the proportion of the population that we're sampling. There's a little mathematical thing where stuff happens when you're sampling a large proportion of the population. So when I'm saying this, as long as the sample size is only a small portion of the population, it's the sample size that matters and not the population size. So as a notion of this, let's say we take a sample of 1,000 adults in Canada and 1,000 adults in the United States. And from each of those, we're trying to say something about the respective adults of that country. We can say the same thing about adults from Canada and adults from the U.S., right? Those, even though the U.S. has the population that's 10 times as big, it's not the proportion of the population that you're sampling. It is the sample size. So those 1,000 adults from Canada, whatever the information we get from those, we're going to try and say something about the Canadian population of adults. Those 1,000 people from the United States, we're trying to say something based on that to the American population of adults. And that's totally fine. Even though, first of all, those are very small proportions, right? Still no problem. Sample size of 1,000, that's quite a bit, actually. When we have studies or surveys for elections and things like that, depending on the election, maybe 1,000 is quite a few people. Big United States elections might be 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people, that kind of thing. But 1,000 is starting to get substantial, even when you have hundreds of millions of people. So it might be a little bit not super intuitive there. That it's not the proportion, but it's the sample size. We'll look at some of the math later. Sample sizes don't need to be equal. So if we have some study where we have 5 observations in one and 100,000 observations in the other, you might think it's completely useless. And well, we'd given our druthers, we'd probably wish it was 50-50 split. There's some mathematical good things that happen that way. But it's not like it's useless information. You go, poof, there's 5 people in this group, and poof, 100,000 in that group. The math will take care of that. The math will take care of that. I mean, there's the mathematical ideas where our estimators of the differences in, let's say, the population means, our estimators are going to be better in a sense if it was more evenly split. But the math will take care of it, and our statements we make at the end aren't going to be useless. They're going to be valid statements. If we have 5 people in one group and 100,000 in the other, we can still do that. The math will know. Then overall, when we're looking at things, do not put too much faith. Don't put a lot of faith in the results of any single study for all sorts of reasons. Publication bias is real. Interesting results getting published more often than not so interesting results. You're doing a big study, and if in reality, that little hybrid of corn is really no different than the other corns, right? Nobody really cares, right? They might, but it's sort of provocative things, interesting things. Those are the things that have a greater tendency to get published. And it's really problematic because really interesting or weird things kind of less likely to be true and more than mundane things. So there's a lot to it. We could talk about that quite a bit. But there's problematic bits in the world of publishing and how the media handles mainstream expression of results of studies and things like that. And then we have all sorts of problems. Bigwig researchers just straight lying, not that often, but happens sometimes. Fabrication of data, right? Oopsies. So problems there. That's not as common as just the basic problems and like this replicability crisis, where the results of large portions of studies, large proportion of studies, psychology journals did a big thing on this, right? Where looked at trying to replicate 100 famous studies kind of thing as best they could, putting a lot of time into it, and about 40 or so showing the same or similar results as the previous study. So if people found this really troubling, I'm going to be honest, I would have guessed about that for all the reasons we've discussed here briefly. But just even when we start talking about statistical significance and all of this, keep this in mind as well. All these problems that can happen, publication bias and things, fabrication of data, tweaking what method you're using to do. People like to say p-hacking and things like this, right? I don't really like that term, but there's all sorts of problems, manipulating data, even kind of honestly, I'm going to use this method here, do this transformation because I thought it was best, when really it was because it showed what you wanted. So we want to avoid that. I teach statistics here where we are honest, okay? Not everybody goes that route. Anyway, that's it for this chapter. All of this stuff we've talked about, important for the remainder of the course. We're moving on to descriptive statistics. I don't think quite as interesting as this, perhaps, but just as necessary in our efforts to get to the truth. We'll talk about that soon.